out, and we're pretty sure the president is reconsidering that. News reports today say he is. But we didn't want to leave the impression last night that the administration is the main threat to gun rights or to due process. It's not. In fact, it's not even close. Here's a reminder of how the other side feels about those things.
Force these allegedly Christian men and women who stuff their pockets with money from the NRA year after year after year to do something now.
So many thousands of people are dying every year for this so-called liberty.
You have a whole generation of young people who essentially see the NRA as their enemy. To them, the NRA is like the KKK. It's just some hostile force that is against them, that's risking their lives.
The Bible warns us not to worship false gods, and yet it does seem that much of America is indeed worshipping at the altar of the gun gods.
We're getting lectures on Christianity from the media. Pretty amazing. Trump did say something stupid about due process the other day, and the fact is, though, that the left has been opposing due process, the most basic of our constitutional rights, for a long time, particularly on the subject of gun control. When was the last time you heard a Democratic politician praise the Australian solution to gun violence? A lot. If you're watching CNN, you probably heard it today. They say it all the time. The question is, do you know anything about how Australia implemented gun control? Well, confiscation. They took the guns away from the population by force, and not just from criminals and people who've been convicted of wrongdoing. The government of Australia took guns from law-abiding people who had done nothing wrong. They punished the innocent. What exactly did that look like? Well, here's an ad from one of Australia's gun confiscation efforts. It shows naked men in a prison shower and warns the public to turn their guns in or else they'll be sent to prison too. Effectively, the government threatened law-abiding citizens with prison rape if they didn't surrender their guns. That's what liberals are calling for in this country every time they talk about the Australian solution. And there are a lot more ads like that. We're going to tweet them out tonight. By the way, that's what the assault weapons ban is. Democrats are pushing for a law that would outlaw more than 200 kinds of firearms, as well as all guns that have various irrelevant cosmetic features like bayonet lugs and lots of other things people who wrote the law know nothing about. If that law passes, and it might if the Democrats take Congress, you will be punished. You'll have fewer rights. But wait a second. You've done nothing wrong. You never shot anybody. You have no plans to shoot anybody. Doesn't matter. Democrats will treat you the same way they treat convicted felons, as unworthy to be trusted with firearms. Meanwhile, their bodyguards will still have the most powerful guns available. Of course they will, because they can, because they're in charge and you're not. The left is also demanding the government bar people under 21, these are people who are eligible to vote and serve in the military, from buying firearms. Now, again, most people under 21 haven't done anything wrong. They haven't been convicted of a crime or committed crimes. But a few of them have. So Democrats are saying all must be punished. Imagine applying the same standard to other constitutional rights. For example, let's say somebody shouted fire in a crowded theater and scores died. Would the rest of us lose our right to free speech? These are real questions. They're inconvenient so soon after the massacre in Parkland, for which the country is still grieving. But we should remember, this is a country worth living in precisely because we take the Constitution seriously. When we stop taking it seriously, it won't be a country worth living in. President Trump seems to have remembered that. Many on the left never knew it, and they don't care anyway. You often hear progressives say they want an honest conversation about guns. Well, of course we do too. And that's why we've invited the heads of almost every different gun control group to come on this show and tell us what they really believe. We'll let them talk. Mike Bloomberg's group, George Soros's groups, Gabby Gifford's group. They've all refused to come on. They're delighted to appear on CNN, obviously, where they're celebrated and never challenged. We'd still like to have that conversation because we think it's important. So we're joined tonight by someone who will come on, Antoine C. Wright. He's founder and CEO of Blueprint Strategy, and he joins us tonight. Antoine, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker, for having me.
Well, I appreciate it because so many others with your views won't. It's an analogy, but I think it's still worth talking about. What I just mentioned a minute ago about another constitutional right, the freedom of speech. If someone were to misuse that freedom in a way that was illegal, would that mean the rest of us had to give up some of our right to the freedom of speech?
Absolutely not, Tucker, but here's what we all have to do. We all have to take a deep breath and focus on the issue at hand. For me, the focus on the issue at hand is trying to figure out how we prevent another mass shooting in this country, right, so one more parent can not have to deal with burying their child once again. And that's where my focus is. I don't want to make this, Tucker, I don't want to make this about left or right, liberal or conservative. This is simply about trying to do something to prevent another mass shooting.
Well, obviously, wait, hold on. I totally agree with that. I think every decent person, maybe even some non-decent people agree. Nobody thinks these are good. They're hurting the country. We're all against them. The question is, what do you do? There are policy solutions being floated, and the question is, are they good ideas or not? Are they consistent with the Constitution or not? So what is the solution to these shootings that you think would work?
Well, here's what I think reasonable people believe. We know that somewhere north of 65% of the American people believe we should do something. Here's what I think we should do. One, I'm not one of those people who say we need to take away everyone's gun. I know that's the fallback Republican talking point, and Democrats want to take away their guns. That's not true. I'm a proud weapon owner. I appreciate being able to carry my gun freely in this country. But here's what I do believe. If you have mental health issues, there's probably a good chance that you should not be able to have a firearm. If we can close the Charleston loophole. I'm from South Carolina. My dear friend and mentor, Senator Clemente Pinckney, was killed in a church in Charleston because Dylan Ruth was able to purchase a gun when the background check did not come back in a certain amount of days.
But hold on, let's just get to the first one. So the law currently says, and since you're a gun owner, you know this because you would fill it out on the federal form, that if you've been adjudicated mentally ill, if you've been determined to have a mental illness, you can't buy a gun. That's already the law. So what changes would you make since, again, that's already the law?
Well, here's the thing. Different states have different laws. Recently in South Carolina, passed legislation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's federal. That's on the federal form, the federal background check the DOJ does on every gun owner. If you buy a gun, you have to fill this out. And you're not allowed to buy a gun if you've been adjudicated mentally ill. So what specific change would you make?
Well, I think the word mental illness, it varies. One doctor can diagnose you one thing, one the other. But I think we need to be consistent when we talk about the issue of mental health issues, and that's just one thing I would change. The other thing
what would the change? I mean, I don't want to be obstinate, but I just want to get to the specifics here because the specifics matter. It's public policy. What specific change would you make?
On the issue specifically of mental health. In some places, people with mental illnesses can go into a gun show or either online and buy a weapon. You and I both knew that. That's why we just saw that happen. Hold on,
we just saw that happen in Florida. A kid with mental illness was able to buy a gun because the school refused to turn him over to the cops. But how would you stop that? What would you do specifically?
That's my point. We have to have comprehensive, extensive background checks so that we can prevent another person. Who has mental health issues from having a gun.
Okay. But here's where we're having an actual bipartisan, real conversation. We both agree that the mentally ill, dangerous people shouldn't have guns. But what do you do specifically? We already have a comprehensive background check. Would you, I don't know, tell me your solution. I'm sincerely interested.
Tucker, if you let me finish getting through, we're going to have to tighten up on closing the gap to make sure that these laws are in place, making sure they're truly enforced.
But the law's already there, so I'm confused.
But again, enforcement, there are laws on the books, but we have to enforce them and tighten, strengthen them where we need to.
Okay. Let me ask you this question.
I think you can agree with that, right, Tucker?
Yeah, I don't know what that means. It doesn't actually mean anything. I mean, it's the kind of thing that all of us, and even Jimmy Kimmel, can sort of nod and feel virtuous, but like...
Tucker, it means enforcing the laws of their own books. There's no reason why this young man in Florida shouldn't have been able to.
Let me ask you a question, though, since we're on this subject. So there are hundreds of thousands, close to 500,000 returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who get money from the federal government. A lot of them are on medication because they have a mental illness. They've said that. It's called PTSD. Should they be allowed to buy guns?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, you said
you can fundamentally disagree. I'm
just searching for honest answers from people. I don't have to agree. I just want to know what you thought, and you said it honestly, and I appreciate that.
But Tucker, can I give you a few more things that I think reasonable people?
Well, we're almost out of time, but hit me really quick. Yep.
I think reasonable people agree that we need to make sure that if you're under the age of 18, you should not be able to purchase an assault weapon in this country. I think
should you be able to carry one as a member of our armed services at 17, which is now the law?
As a member, you are trained to fight war as a member of the armed services.
But if we don't trust you, hold on. Can I ask you a question?
Let me finish. Let me finish. Law enforcement and members of our military, I think that is the one exception I think Democrats and Republicans
But if we don't trust you to carry a gun, why are we trusting you to vote?
Tucker, that's apples and oranges.
No, it's not. I mean, people who vote run the country.
We're talking about.
So you're not trustworthy enough to carry a firearm, but you can vote.
Tucker. When you vote, go into the booth to vote, you don't run the risk of being able to kill someone.
That's where you're wrong, Antoine. Read a little history.
Oh my God! Well, please tell me how, Tucker. I would love to hear that.
There have been a lot of maniacs who killed a lot of people who have been elected to the ballot box, as you may know. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you, Antoine. I appreciate seeing you. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent. He's an NRA TV contributor, and he joins us tonight. So a lot of people are saying, Dan, as you know, why should, here you had this kid who was 19, he was a nutcase, shouldn't have had a gun in the first place, yet he bought it legally. So maybe we should ban all people his age or under 21 from buying guns, to which you say?
I say I'm really sick of liberals. I mean, like, really sick, like getting physically ill listening to them because they can't be consistent on an argument. You know what's fascinating about your prior guest? I've argued with liberals about so-called gun control, which you accurately called people control, you're right, for days now. And they'll make opposing arguments. Just a few days ago, a guy said to me, well, you have to be 21 to buy alcohol. I said, you're talking about the purchase of a mind-altering substance, not the operation of a firearm. Yet this guy comes around and talking about voting, he makes the exact opposite argument. Well, they're apples and oranges. So is booze and guns. But it doesn't matter to liberals because they'll tell you the same thing, Tucker, about immigration laws and abortion laws. They'll be like, you know what? Those laws don't matter. Immigration, we don't really have to follow those laws. Matter of fact, people don't, and we should give them government benefits. Abortion laws, don't put any abortion laws on the books. They'll all be ignored. But gun laws, those will really work. Those will definitely stop homicidal maniacs from getting guns and preying on the rest of us while we're all unarmed. This is so beyond stupid that we're all losing IQ points by debating with these people.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, abortion, which is not mentioned in the Constitution, is the beating heart of our constitutional rights, whereas guns, which are in the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights, that's not even there. So I guess I appreciate people who are sincerely trying to solve this problem because all of us recognize how horrible it is. But are you starting to suspect that a lot of these so-called solutions are not really about making the public safer, but about something else?
Tucker, 15 years in law enforcement and 5 years studying the issue and doing commentary on it. This is what people have to understand. Get this through your heads and don't ever forget it. There are two parallel tracks for gun owners, okay? For liberals, let's do this slow. Here's one, here's two, okay? On the first track, you have legal gun owners. You have to go through a background check, fill out a 4473. You can't be a prohibited possessor, okay? That's how good people, non-criminals, get guns. Then you have track number two, people who steal them and buy them on the black market. Right. They don't care about track number one, Tucker, at all. So you have a law, by the way, which only impacts good law-abiding people and does nothing for criminals. Let me ask you this, Tucker. What other law works like that? Do burglary laws affect you? Has Tucker Carlson ever thought about burglarizing a house and be like, darn, they don't affect you. The burglary laws you don't care about at all. You're like, good, let's have maximum penalties for burglary laws. Gun laws are the only laws that affect the law-abiding and don't affect criminals one bit. They have a thriving black market for guns. I mean, well, it's absurd.
Our immigration laws keep out millions of potential software engineers, but are ignored by 11 million people from the third world who are living here because they didn't care. Right. No, it's a perfect example. Dan, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. You got it.
California, the Golden State, biggest state, once the best state, now looks nothing like it did. It's falling apart. Lawmakers encourage defiance of the nation's laws. The state is the least livable in America. What went wrong? So very wrong. We'll tell you next. Law. Last weekend, Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf warned local residents of imminent ICE raids, potentially allowing several dangerous criminals to escape. Now, the Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom, who hopes to become the governor soon once Jerry Brown leaves, is calling for other local leaders to do the same thing, because that'll make the state a lot better. Of course it will. Travis Allen is a California State Assemblyman, a Republican gubernatorial candidate, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Allen, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Tucker. Pleasure being on.
So I haven't lived in California in a while, so I don't really know the answer, but does anyone notice that the state of California is in open rebellion against the United States? Is that noted out there?
You know, Californians are all scratching their head at what's going on with Jerry Brown, Gavin Newsom, and the California Democrat Party. I will tell you right now, don't believe the media reports. Ordinary Californians are absolutely shocked at what's going on in the streets of California.
So, I mean, what do you think the core problem is? I mean, California was once the greatest state in the union. People came from all over the world to live there. I mean, look at popular media from 50 years ago. People sang about moving to California. People are fleeing California now. What changed exactly, do you think?
Well, you know, what changed is decades of the Democrats running the California legislature. You know, as you may have heard, 39 of the last 40 years, the California Democrats have controlled both houses of the state legislature. And Jerry Brown and his father have controlled California for 24 of the last 50 years. So, you know, as this has progressed, we've started to see our taxes go up, our businesses leave, our people leave. As a matter of fact, we had 243,000 Californians leaving over the last 7 years, taking $8 billion with them. And now we're seeing open lawlessness, where we have Javier Becerra, the criminal attorney general of California, openly threatening California businesses that if you follow federal immigration law, he's going to prosecute you. And of course, you've heard of Libby Schaaf. It's getting even worse now.
So tell me a little bit about the 250,000 Californians who've left in the past 7 years. I mean, those are middle class. Those are normal middle class people, right? I mean, the kind that you form a society around.
Well, you know, I can tell you very personally, these are my parents. My parents have left the state. My brother's left the state. My best friend now lives in Texas, where he doubled the size of his house, doubled the size of his business, and he pays no state income tax. I'm also an investment advisor in addition to be a California state assemblyman. And I can tell you that my clients all started in California. They're now in 22 different states around the nation.
I mean, do the people who run the state have any, do they know this? Do they pay any attention? I mean, I know your tech sector is doing well, and you've got more poor people than ever, so you're sort of booming on either end, but are they worried about the middle class fleeing?
You know, if you listen to Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom, it's as if they live in a bubble. They absolutely do not see this. But it's understandable. I mean, if you were Gavin Newsom, the former mayor of San Francisco, and you had maps of human waste so people can actually navigate through your city, hypodermic needles on your sidewalk, and actually now opening heroin injection centers starting in July in San Francisco, I think it might make sense to look the other way at the facts, because that really is the only explanation in California. Highest poverty in the nation, 1 in 5 Californians living below the poverty line, highest homelessness in the nation, and I mean, the numbers go on and on.
They destroyed something so beautiful, and they should be punished for it. Assemblyman, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
U.S. News and World Report just released their new best states ranking, and they have bad news for the state of California. Despite having a powerful economy, the most fertile farmland in the world, probably the prettiest physical environment on planet Earth, California was rated dead last in quality of life, if you can even believe it. Ethan Behrman is a California radio host. He still lives there. He joins us tonight. Ethan, how do you take a place that was world famous as Eden and in 50 years make it the worst place in America? And please don't blame others. Like, the people who run the state should take, I think, responsibility for that, don't you?
Well, it's a complicated issue. Here we specifically have the issue, if you're going to go 50 years, Tucker, the population has well more than doubled in that time. And because we have all the natural beauty, we have mountains,
where did they come from? Hold on, where did the majority, in the past 30 years, where did the majority of those people come from? Do they come from the Midwest or these? No, they came from a third world country. Do you think it might have something to do with it?
I think that is a very complicated issue. If you look in Silicon Valley in particular, Tucker, since you were just talking about the booming Silicon Valley, that is a lot of coming from South Asia, from China, from countries that you might think are poor, but they've come in and they've contributed and they've built tremendous businesses. We have a massive Sikh community. We have a Korean community.
They've been great, and they represent a tiny percentage of the population of California. The overwhelming majority have come from Latin America. And a lot of them are awesome people and smart and add a lot. And even the super poor ones, I think a lot of them are really great people. But the truth is, if you import millions of really poor people with no education, doesn't mean they're bad people. But maybe your state gets a lot more like the countries they left. Can we admit that, or are we pretending that's not true still?
Well, I don't think I agree with you, because remember, the cost of living here is extremely high. That is, when you look at that U.S. News and World Report and you look at how they measure what you just talked about, quality of life, it's cost of living is what's throwing us way out of whack.
So maybe too many people came over the border and the state is totally overpopulated, and you're dealing with the normal problems that come with overpopulation, like really expensive housing prices, no?
No, part of our problem here actually is a little bit of NIMBYism. We love our green space, so we restrict development, and anytime you restrict development, you're a free market guy.
Really, green space.
You know that causes prices to go up.
So I want to show you a picture that a friend of mine took last week. He works downtown San Francisco, 2 blocks from Uber. This is the street right in front of his office. I think it's Market Street in San Francisco, one of the richest cities in the world. Those are hypodermic needles. They're syringes that heroin addicts left there. That's not green space. That's filth. And why would anybody, look, if your city looks like that, you've failed. Can't we just admit that, or are we still pretending that's progress?
I think that there is a real significant issue that is happening in California, that 1/8 of our homeless population, we know this from the surveys, they come here from elsewhere. This is actually a federal issue that Californians are having to deal with, because you don't die in a nor'easter here, Tucker. In Minneapolis, where I grew up, people die because they freeze to death. So
why doesn't Houston's more temperate even than San Francisco? But Houston doesn't look like that. It's kind of weird. I mean, you'd think if it was just like the weather, that Houston, which is bigger, of course, than San Francisco by a factor of 5 or whatever, would have, you know, a lot more hypodermic needles. But wait, there are none. Why is that? Any idea?
So we have more lenient drug laws here, and we always have. But we also,
it's run by liberals.
We also have
who aren't good at running things.
We have a problem, though. The opioid epidemic right now, Tucker, so if you're going to point out hypodermic needles, 65,000 people a year are dying right now because of that. Heroin and the opioid epidemic plays into all of that, including rural Kentucky and rural Ohio. But because
none of which look
San Francisco
like that,
is a big target, then you can point out San Francisco.
Okay, let me just ask you quickly. So you won't concede that unrestrained immigration has affected the poverty level in California, the crowding in California, the rising housing prices in California. The millions of poor people coming to this state have had no bad effects at all. Will you concede that unrestrained immigration in California has had any downside at all? Any?
Yes, the biggest downside is the criminal element likes to prey on them, and we've had a real problem in
they're
California.
the victims. This is like a parody.
Absolutely, yeah.
So is that Kate Steinle who's the victim?
That happens, and
it's the illegal.
This is why we need to. This is why we need Congress to deal with the immigration issue. We need a solution. The president brought all the leaders together into the White House. He told them to make a deal, and even said he would take the heat. Yet the Republicans have chosen not to do anything about it.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time, because that's actually one of the more hilarious conversations I've ever had. I hope you will come back. Ethan, it's great to see you.
Thank you. Yes.
As you just heard, and he's right, millions of Americans are addicted to opioid painkillers. Thousands are dying. Painkillers still have supporters, though. One of them joins us next. Another installment tonight in our series, Drugged. The opioid epidemic is the worst drug crisis in the history of this country. Every year, drug overdoses kill more people than the entire Vietnam War, and the vast majority of those are caused by opioids, as you well know by now. But in a twist on past drug epidemics, opioid abuse is directly caused by American medicine. Huge quantities of opioid painkillers are prescribed every year, and that has created millions of addicts. Not everyone is convinced, though, that painkillers are to blame. Dr. Steve Stanos is president of the American Academy of Pain Medicine, and he joins us tonight. Doctor, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
Thanks. So at the very nascent stages of the current disaster, this epidemic, your organization, along with another, released this statement, and I just want to get your take on it now, 21 years later. And I'm quoting, "Studies indicate that the development of addiction when opioids are used for the relief of pain is low. Furthermore, experience has shown that known addicts can benefit from the carefully supervised judicious use of opioids." In light of everything we've seen in the past 21 years, what do you think of that statement?
Well, I think we've learned a lot over the last 20 years around pain management. Going back to that statement, it was stated that the risk for addiction was low. I think over time we've seen that there is a risk for addiction with patients, and it's still a problem, but using medications with the wrong patients that develop an addiction problem or misusing the medicines can lead to all sorts of problems. But the studies more recently have shown that the risk of addiction from starting with pain, separate from having a substance abuse problem, is from at least 10% or a little higher than that. So it's low, but it's still significant. So we really need to be careful in who gets these medicines and deciding if these are effective therapies. I think what's important, Tucker, is that really pain management isn't synonymous with opioid management. You know, there's so many other options for our patients.
If you take 3 steps back, here you have physicians who I think are almost universally trusted by people, or trained to trust them. Their job is to heal us.
Right.
Basically telling people to take more opioids, and now we have tens of thousands of dead and whole communities destroyed, and the middle class life expectancy literally shrinking because of this. And it's like, oh, sorry, we were wrong. Wouldn't a more functional society punish people who said something like that?
Well, I think the focus should obviously be on how do we assess who's effective for this treatment, what types of treatments could they benefit from. Like I explained, there's so many other options for patients, and maybe a small percentage of patients need to be on opioids as part of their treatment plan. But I'm not sure about accusing who was wrong or right.
Well, I mean,
really
I guess that's why I'm saying this. So, I mean, there are all kinds of mistakes that people make, and you know, most of them are in good faith. But if the industry that makes the product is using physicians to convince other physicians and then the public to use more of the product, then I think it's fair to suspect there's a financial motivation. And I don't want to be a lefty about it, but I don't want to use the phrase greed is killing people, but it kind of looks like that a little bit, if you see what I mean.
Again, I can't speak for what a pharmaceutical company might do. I would hope they would work in the interest of the patient. But again, I really think the discussion should be on how do we assess patients for pain management and understand that we have these other treatments for those patients. And if they do develop an addiction problem, what are the resources for those patients? So I think really we need to expand our understanding of pain management and you know, kind of deal with the patients who are suffering. And we have a significant millions of patients with chronic pain, and they need to have their pain treated effectively.
Of course,
and again, I'm not implying that they all need to be on opioids, and there's been a lot done to kind of decide and do a better job of stratifying patients, deciding which patients are at risk, which patients aren't. How do we monitor patients better? I think that's where medicine is going, and hopefully from that, that's going to help at least from the prescription side, see a reduction in the deaths related to opioid prescriptions.
But I wonder what you thought. But hold on, I wonder what you thought over the past 15 years, or what the manufacturers thought when they saw it. Of course, they know where their product goes, so they did see it. That there were counties in West Virginia and Kentucky that were getting, by a factor of, let's say, 10, more opioid doses than they had people, wildly disproportionate to any conventional human need. Clearly, that's feeding a raging addiction, a social disaster, and they didn't do anything about it. Like, where were you when that was happening?
Well, I mean, I can't say for what was done in these smaller communities. I have to say that there was, in some cases, diversion of medicines. There were pill mills where physicians or bad apples were, prescribing knowingly that these medicines were going to be abused and misused. I can't support that. I don't think any physician would support that.
But where were the manufacturers? No, but hold on. It was your group that helped convince physicians to be looser in their prescription of opioids. And, of course, the manufacturers are getting, the Sackler family has gotten extremely rich, on the Forbes list because of it. They knew this was happening, but they didn't do anything, and I don't understand why.
Well, I think I would maybe correct that as that our group, the American Academy of Pain Medicine, other pain associations and physician groups, the American Medical Association, have been supporting, appropriate management of chronic pain. And again, whether that includes opioids or not. So our goal has always been to assess patients. There's a number of different strategies that physicians can use to, help monitor patients to see if they're taking their medicines effectively.
I get it, but if you're suggesting that people use opioids in ways that they didn't before, and that's what the statement we read suggests, isn't it incumbent upon you to see how that turns out? So you see, like, massive amounts of hydrocodone are going to some pharmacy in Florida or Wheeling, West Virginia. Don't you get on the phone with the federal government and say, whoa, 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 there's something wrong here? But no one did that.
Yeah, Tucker, I'm not sure what happened at the federal level or at the state level to, to kind of be more aware of this criminal activity that was going on around that. Again, our focus was really, and has been, to really push for better treatment of chronic pain.
Okay. Doctor, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, if you don't want your child to change his or her or pick a pronoun, the gender of the child, the government may have them taken from you. Take your kids away because you don't want your child underage to change his or her sex. Where did all of this come from? Is it based on science? Can we resist it? The author of a new book on this subject joins us next.
Oh,
is sweeping the West. Experts now tell us that contrary to common sense and thousands of years of consensus of all prior humans ever to live, gender is now fluid, meaning it's not actually real and people can change it at will. Okay, if you disagree with that, though, you can get fired. Ryan Anderson is a Heritage Foundation Fellow, author of a new book called When Harry Became Sally, and he joins us now. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be with you.
Really try to be open-minded. I'm open-minded about this, but I'm also confused by it. This came out of nowhere. It's now an ironclad consensus among elites, not allowed to disagree. Is that the result of a scientific discovery that I missed?
No, this is the result of ideology. And it's the result of ideology that came right after Obergefell. We had activists, LGBT. As soon as they won on the LGB part, they pivoted to the T part. And what's shocking here is what they're doing to children. Prescribing puberty-blocking drugs, which aren't FDA approved for this purpose, to indefinitely delay a child's puberty, and then prescribing cross-sex hormones, giving testosterone to girls, giving estrogen to boys, to try to transition them into the opposite sex.
Is there any science that undergirds that? I mean, these are obvious questions, but everyone's so afraid to ask them, which is always a sign something weird's going on. Is there science that tells us this is a good idea? Do we know the long-term effects of any of this? Does it work?
There's no robust science on this. There's no even long-term study. So they're conducting an experiment on children. We have no idea what the consequences are of blocking a child's puberty and then giving a child estrogen or testosterone when they're a boy or a girl, giving them the opposite sex's sex hormone.
Well, why would we? Okay, but hold on. We're pretty sensitive about our children. You can't just put an additive in Rice Krispies and hope it works out well. How are we doing this to kids without any sense of what the long-term consequences are going to be?
Well, the experts here think they can correctly identify which children are truly transgender and only block their
Is there a blood test for that?
There's not. The criterion here is that a child is insistent, consistent, and persistent. And it's not just with teenagers. This is little kids. 5-year-olds are encouraged to socially transition. So you give a new name, a new wardrobe, a new pronoun to a grade school kid.
So what happens? Look, I mean, maybe, I'm open-minded, but I'm suspicious because whenever you ask any question at all, you get shouted down.
Right.
Why is that?
Unfortunately, the left doesn't want to have the conversation. I mean, so what inspired me to actually write the book was that people need to know what the science is on this, what the medicine is, what the philosophy is. And the best science shows that 80 to 95% of children with a gender identity conflict will grow out of it. The best science shows that 41% of people who identify as transgender will attempt suicide at some point in their lives. And that people, after they have sex reassignment surgery, 19 times more likely to die by suicide. Those statistics are tragic, and we need to, hit the pause button and think more critically about how we can help people who are suffering. Because obviously, if you feel so distressed in your own body, you would contemplate reassigning your sex, you're suffering, and we need to have a more compassionate and effective response to these people.
And an open conversation, that's always a sign. I can't even imagine what kind of grief you're getting for this book, but...
You could see my Twitter timeline if you wanted to...
Yeah, no, but I just think whenever you try and shut down sincere questions, you're in the wrong.
That's right.
So I applaud you for asking those questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Russia has been the dominant story on television for more than a year. In fact, it's all that's on television. A new poll suggests Americans really care. Oh, wait, no, sorry, they don't care at all. Like, not even a look. 1/2% lists Russia as their top concern. Huh? That story next. So the Russia story is just huge. It's unbelievable. There's nothing more important. They hacked our democracy. Putin's in charge. Every American cares. We know that. Well, I don't know how we know it, because a new USA Today poll shows that literally less than 1% of voters say that so-called Russian meddling is their top election issue for 2018. CNN hasn't seen the poll, obviously, or they don't care, because tonight they're running something called Trump in Russia, a CNN investigation, which describes their programming every day. That's pretty hilarious. We've been hearing about Russia nonstop, literally nonstop, for more than a year. Almost no information has come out to justify the obsession. None has come out to justify the claim that there was collusion. And most Americans are no longer interested, if they ever were. So what's going on here? Robin Barrow is a former regional director for Barack Obama's presidential campaign, and he joins us tonight. So, Robin, thanks for coming on. So this is confusing to me because normally you'd say, look, maybe the Democratic Party and their propaganda arm in the media just didn't explain this well enough. That's not true. They've actually really worked hard to make this palatable, to explain it, to unpack it, as we say in the media. They've been relentless in their presentation of this, and people still don't care. So why is that, do you think?
Why do Americans not care? Is that the question?
Yeah, why do Americans not care?
Because we've been hearing about this for over a year. This is an ongoing investigation, as you know. Very little trickles out from an ongoing FBI investigation because Mueller's building a case. So he's given us, we've got little tidbits of who has testified to the House Intel Committee, but that's about it. So after hearing about this for a year without much information coming out, as it should not, because they're still building a case, there's just not a lot to go on. Americans are more concerned about what's happening at home with their pocketbooks, what's happening with their taxes, what's going on, when they're going to get their tax refunds. There's a lot of other things I think that Americans are concerned about right now.
Well, I think you're absolutely right there. I mean, I agree with you completely. So, but it's just sort of interesting. So you're saying that we don't really know anything, so why would they care? Right. And yet the news coverage is literally wall to wall. And I'm not overstating that. I've got a bank of TVs in my office. I keep the sound off because it's masochistic to turn it up. But I see the screen all day long, and it's all Russia all day long for more than a year. So if we don't know anything, what are they talking about?
I watched about 10 minutes of Rachel Maddow, and it was like an obsession. So I understand that the media, on other networks, they are obsessed with this, but the public does seem to have lost interest in this. And I totally understand why, because we just don't have enough information right now. Maybe if more information came out. Now, when we got the Nunes memo, that was a big story. We got that. The Democratic memo didn't seem to gen up as much interest. But right now, the Russian meddling story it's just not really resonating with everyday Americans.
I'm being unfair. Let me just say I was unfair to blame this all in the media. I mean, really, the core concern comes from their paymasters in the Democratic Party whose interests they serve. And so it's really Democrats who've been driving this, and we've had a bunch of them on this show, nice people.
Yes.
But if they don't know anything, why are they so obsessed? And why aren't they talking about things that Americans actually care about?
I wish I knew. I take a lot of issue with my own party. There's a lot that we can improve on. We need a coherent message to deliver to Americans other than just resist. We need to be giving them ideas where we can maybe improve their lives other than just giving them, promises of resist.
Wait.
I don't even know what we're resisting.
The lives of illegal aliens here and giving them citizenship and voting rights. I thought that they'd shut down the government over that. Remember that? That was the top priority of the Democratic Party. Do you think that's a winner in 2018?
No, it wouldn't have been a winner for either party. I think honestly, if we were to take apart that issue, it wouldn't have helped either party to have mass deportations of young people who are in college, maybe serving in our military. I'm a veteran. I served with some of these guys in the military. Right. I don't think that would have played favor with either party. So I understand the concern there, but I just think that my party. Gosh, I don't have the number right in front of me.
Well, I do, actually. More of them got busted for gang activity than served in the U.S. military, just to kind of put it in some perspective.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I understand it's a legitimate concern. I'm a pretty conservative Democrat. I'm more of a blue dog Democrat, so we probably agree on some of these same issues.
Well, you should tell your party the Russia stuff. I mean, look, if we find out that Trump and Putin have been plotting, a takeover of the West from, their hot tub or whatever, then that's a real story, but... Jeez.
Now, I would always say that, the protection of our way of democracy is very important. So I agree with that.
We're trying.
I just let's just let this thing run out. And if Trump gets exonerated, he should be a happy man.
There you go. Thanks, Robin. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Up next, we've got an update on the left's war on what they're calling toxic masculinity. Pretty amazing. Stay tuned.